Hey Cliff.
You know what time it is?
Yeah, it's Song Lovers Online
It's
time.
Song Lovers Online. Welcome. Glad that you're here with us again for yet another installment. We're going to do 3 really interesting hymns, and some of them actually have some cool stories behind them. So we're going to start with number 99, On Christ the Solid Rock. This was written by Edward Mote, an Englishman. His parents owned a London pub, and they neglected him, probably because they're in the pub all the time.
Yeah, right.
His quote, he says, "My Sabbaths were spent in the streets at play. So ignorant was I that I did not know there was a God." In 1813, he heard a gentleman named John Hyatt preach, and in 1815, he was baptized. So this is what I wonder. We read all these things about these people and the preaching, like George Whitefield, who was over here preaching, who converted like thousands of people. Crazy.
Yeah.
He ran a successful cabinet-making business. In 1852, he became a pastor of the Baptist Church in Horsham, Sussex. The congregation offered him the church building as a gift.
Oh, wow.
Think we'll do that with Paul?
I was going to say, yeah. How would you? Oh, here's your gift. You get the building.
We could give him Bessie.
Yeah, definitely. Put it in his house.
So he replied, "I do not want the chapel. I only want the pulpit. And when I cease to preach Christ, then turn me out of that." How's that for a quote?
Yeah.
So this hymn was written in 1834. He wrote the refrain in the first 4 stanzas on his way to work when it came into my mind to write an hymn on the gracious experience of a Christian. The last 2 verses were written after visiting an ill parishioner. And you'll see we've only got 4. There were 6.
Oh, okay.
So 2 have been ditched for whatever reason. The tune was called The Solid Rock. It's written by William Bradbury, and you'd recognize Bradbury because he wrote the tunes for Jesus Loves Me, Just As I Am, Sweet Hour of Prayer, Savior Like a Shepherd Lead Us, and a whole bunch more. He was a student of Lowell Mason. We're going to talk about Lowell Mason a little bit later. He was an organist, a choir director, a composer, a teacher, a publisher, and a piano builder. In fact, I think it was one of his sons that actually started Mason and Hamlin.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that was
It does.
cool. Wonder who Hamlin was. So this was written for this text in 1863.
Okay.
So if you're going to sing along at home, we're going to do verses 1, 3, and 4.
And please sing along. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oath is covenant and blood, support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, He then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When He shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand.
And our next hymn is number 54, in Leave Us, Nearer My God to Thee. This is an interesting history on this one. I was able to dig up a lot of stuff here. It was written by Sarah Flower Adams, an English lady, poet and hymn writer. She was a Unitarian. Her career was hampered by deafness, which she had inherited from her father. She was encouraged by her husband, and she had a brief and successful stint as an actress in 1837. But her poor health caused her to return to writing, and her poor health was tuberculosis. So she dealt with that her life. Her work often addressed equal rights for women and for the working class, and then she died after exhausting herself caring for her invalid sister, who was equally as sickly as she was.
Oh my.
So Adam's pastor asked her to write some hymns for services in his chapel. This was this is in one of her sets. It tells the story of Jacob's dream from Genesis 28, and I'll read that. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set upon the earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. That makes sense. Nearer my God to thee. Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting history with this, that this hymn is really quite popular. This hymn was sung as the SS Valencia went down in 1906 off the coast of Canada. And this may have inspired the legend that about the Titanic, because as the Valencia was going down, they actually did sing this song. The Titanic, they don't really know for sure. They have some accounts that say, yeah, this was the hymn that was sung. Wallace Hartley, the Titanic's band leader, he loved that hymn. He wished it played at his own funeral. It would have been sung and played with a different tune, probably this tune, written by Sir Arthur Sullivan.
There's some similarities between the two.
There are. Hartley was he was a Methodist, and that was popular in Methodist circles with that tune at the time. In fact, this was the first few notes of that tune are inscribed on his memorial marker. The first few lines of this hymn were President William McKinley's dying words in September of 1901. Didn't know that either. And then on September 14th, presumably sometime after he died, there were 5 minutes of silence nationwide. And then bands across the country played this hymn, which was McKinley's favorite. And it was probably this tune that we're about to do. The Confederate Army Band played this as the survivors of Pickett's charge returned from their failed assault.
I did not know that.
And the Rough Riders sang it, who was it that was in the Rough Riders? That was Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Yes.
Sang it at the burial of their comrades after the Battle of Las Guasimas in the Spanish-American War. And get this one, you're gonna like this one, Gene. It was on the operatic stage. The singer Emma Abbott, and I like this quote, she was an uncompromising and grotesque Puritan. So she was Puritan. She rewrote Verdi's La Traviata, so that at the end, when Violetta is supposed to sing Addio del passato, she sings Nearer my God to thee. Man, I bet the critics had a field day with that one.
They certainly did. They certainly took liberties in those days. Well, you couldn't get away with that now.
Oh man. So the tune, this is an interesting character. The tune is called Bethany, the tune that we know. Lowell Mason, an American, influential in church music, and he is credited with reintroducing music into the American public schools. In fact, when I was a teacher, we used to have Lowell Mason Week.
Oh, God.
And you get cute little pencils about it, about music education, little trinkets the kids would pass up. Kids didn't care, but I thought it was interesting. He first became a banker. In 1827, he moved to Boston, and he continued being a banker. He served 3 churches in Boston on a 6-month rotation. I'm not sure how that works. I mean, so I would serve here for 6 months, and then I go to seminary for 6 months, and then the presbys for I don't know if that would work. Back and forth. But then what happens in the interim with those 6? Are there 3 musicians that keep?
I think they did without.
That would be terrible. They'd say, oh, he plays organ a lot better than you do.
That's true.
So He became an important figure on the Boston musical scene. He was president of the Handel and Haydn Society. He taught music in the public schools, and he was co-founder of the Boston Academy of Music. 1838, he was appointed music superintendent for the Boston public school system. He retired at age 59. He could do that because he was a banker, right?
Exactly.
And he moved to New York City with his sons. He took a tour of Germany. He was amazed by their congregational singing, so he returned to New York, became music director for Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church, disbanded the choir and orchestra, installed an organ, and developed congregational singing, so the church was known for the best hymn singing in the city. Which sounds all glorious, but people did not like him at all because they thought that he got rid of all the congregational, like the choir. There was no choir.
Oh.
So when they wanted some music, he had a paid quartet. And they
interesting.
gave him grief about that, but you know,
Interesting.
people will talk. And the other thing about Mr. Mason, so did you know, what is the first university in America? Harvard.
I was going to say it's Harvard, isn't it?
Yeah, 1636 they started Harvard.
Yeah.
And you know what they left out of the curriculum?
Music.
Music, because it was founded by Puritans.
Yes.
And Puritans had no place for music. That was the devil's workshop in music. So that was the death knell of music instruction in our schools. And that's why Lowell Mason became so important, because he brought that back. So I even did some research about the trivium and the quadrivium for the liberal arts. So trivium, you have grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and you would have learned that first. And then you would go on, this is from the medieval days, you would go on to the quadrivium, and you would have, and it was all based on mathematics there, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, which is considered a mathematical discipline.
Right.
Fantastic!
I know.
And then Harvard ditched all of that, and we suffered, and still suffer.
I
Because
think we
music
do,
doesn't have
definitely.
the same place that it ought to have in
Not
kids'
overall.
educations.
Some
Right.
places, yes, but not overall.
Right.
It's a shame.
Yeah. So if you want to sing, well, you should sing along. We're on number 54. We're going to do verses 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Across that Okay, Cliff, so the last one we're doing today is Precious Lord, Take My Hand.
I love that one.
I know. 106 in the book when you're following along. So, Thomas A. Dorsey, 1899-1993. He lived a long time. He's born in Georgia, son of a Baptist minister and a church organist. He moved to Atlanta, then to Chicago, where he played the blues and studied at the Chicago College of Composition and Arranging. Worked with Paramount Records, then he organized the Wildcats Jazz Band for Ma Rainey, the mother of the blues, on her tours in the 20s.
Yeah.
So he directed the choir for a short time at Ebenezer Baptist. Then he directed music at Pilgrim Baptist, where he stayed for more than 40 years. And he toured with Mahalia Jackson, and we talked about her last week.
She keeps cropping up in gospel music.
Yes, she does. So, in 1932, he was singing at a revival meeting in St. Louis and then drove there from Chicago in his Model A Ford. The crowd wanted more and more, so Dorsey received a message that his wife had just died. Dorsey went back to Chicago and found that the child, a boy, had also died. I felt that God had done me an injustice, Dorsey's quoted as saying. I didn't want to serve him anymore or write gospel songs. A friend took him to a college where he was left alone in a room with a piano. It was quiet, he is said to have said. The late evening sun crept through the curtained windows. I sat down at the piano and my hands began to browse over the keys. Something happened to me. I felt at peace. I felt as though I could reach out and touch God. I found myself playing a melody, one I'd never heard or played before, and words came into my head. They just seemed to fall into place. So that's how he composed the poetry for this.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yeah. It seems that sometimes in the midst of great struggle, that's when a lot of creativity happens.
And a friend who drops him off at a college and sticks him in a room with a piano.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. The friend knew he was a musician, and he figured this is a good way for him to
process.
So anyway, the tune.
Yeah, this is interesting. He thought it was an original.
Yeah,
it wasn't no original.
It was actually written by a fellow by the name of George N. Allen. It's called Maitland. The original text was, "Must Jesus bear the cross alone?" Now, Allen was a student of Lowell Mason.
Yeah, Lowell Mason.
From Massachusetts. He graduated from Oberlin College, which taught sacred music and geology there. That's a combination. He taught there from 1837 until he retired in 1864. He founded the Oberlin Musical Association, set up a piano department, raised money for a music hall, and invited famous conductors to campus. His work helped found the Oberlin Conservatory of Music in 1865.
Isn't that terrific?
It's fascinating, and I just got finished reading David McCullough's book about the settling of the Northwest Territory, which is all about Ohio and everything. And so Ohio had just been settled at that point when all of this stuff was going on. Really amazing.
Moving art across the country.
Yeah, yeah.
And if he was a student of Mason, then he knew the importance of that. So.
He definitely did.
Interesting.
Okay, so we're going to do all 3 verses of this.
Yeah, and in our hymnal, it's written in 4, and I know you can track down recordings of it in 4 beats. I think Elvis sang it in 4, didn't he? Or did he actually swing it?
No idea.
But the only way that I like it is swung a little. And the way that Levis was set up was different churches will do what they want. When you do gospel singing, you've got a model, and then you just take off and do other things with it. So we're going to take off, do something different.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me on.
Amen. Thanks for being with us again. Next week, we're going to do another spiritual week. So 3,
Right.
maybe 4 spirituals, because there's not a lot to talk about with individual
Yeah.
spirituals, unless I can find some really cool ones.
Yeah, and some of them are short. You don't need to do all of it, so
Yeah.
sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
Okay. God be with you till we meet again. My good counsels guide upon you, with a shepherd's care and fold you. God be with you till we meet again.
Peace.
Peace.